East Coast International Church. It's really awesome to be with you all today. I just wanted to thank Pastor Kurt for giving me the opportunity to speak while he's away on his cruise with Ms. Jen. He actually sent me a picture just so he can check in with you guys, let you know how excited he is. That's excited to him. He says it all the time. He's always partying, and that's just how his party face looks. But that didn't seem too convincing to me, so I had to adjust it to give him a chance to better reflect how he's feeling. So we have that one instead. So you're welcome, Pastor Kurt. He's having a good time, so just keep him in your prayers. But my name is Jesse. I'm one of the pastors here at East Coast International Church. I oversee youth and media and a couple of other things along with our building next door, El Centro. I also have a really amazing family. I'm husband to my beautiful wife, Juana, and father to our now 1-year-old, Alora. That's a whole 1-year-old baby, man. It's crazy. Oh, man. But today we're continuing our stewardship series we've been in, talking through the wisdom of Solomon. Everyone say Solomon. Nice. I want to hear one more time. One more time. Solomon. That's good. He was a king who was the wealthiest and the wisest of his generation. Now, when we talk about Solomon being the wealthiest king of his generation and all of the things he's done and just like the supernatural overnight kind of provision that God gave him, it's hard to relate, right? Like, I obviously can't relate to that part. But I did have a moment in my life where I came close to like sudden provision. And I remember it so clearly because it never happened again since. I was in 8th grade. It was a holiday of some sort. And I know this because I was able to sleep in and my mom decided to drag me out of bed early. And it was to watch some parade. So I go to this parade with her. Meanwhile, I have other siblings that decided to stay home, which we don't even have to talk about, but I don't know why that was the case. And so we go to watch this parade, and we're watching the never-ending line of people passing us by, and then we head home. That was it. And on our way home, we were walking back, and I'm always one of those people that walk where like you like to look down at the sidewalk pavement lines and see how many steps it takes to get to the next one, and maybe try to see if you can like shorten or whatever. It's weird, don't judge, but that's just how I walk. So that's what I was doing. I was watching the pavement in front of me. I was looking at the grass on the sides for several feet, and all of a sudden, I noticed a super familiar face, like a green face. Now, I just assumed that it was like a dollar bill on the floor, and that was my boy George Washington, because that's all I really ever knew. But as I looked closer and I picked it up, I realized that it wasn't George Washington because this dude's hairline was like further back than George Washington's, right? And if that's the case, it couldn't be Lincoln or Hamilton or Jackson either. And as I picked this bill up, at the time I still didn't know who it was. I just saw in the corner the most beautiful sequence of 3 numbers that I've ever seen up until that point. That was 100. I couldn't believe it. Up until this point, I thought $20 made me rich. So $100, like I might as well drop out of middle school and just go live my new life, right? But that's not even the best part, because these $100 were bundled up with other bills, $200 more to be exact. I remember I was just in disbelief. I showed my mom, and of course, the first thing she did as a responsible person was to try to see who was around us so we can see if we can give that money back if someone dropped it. And a part of me was thankful because we couldn't find nobody, which means that 8th grade Jesse's net worth just increased 300%. I was living like as a top 1%er at this point, and so I did what any kid would do after living this new life, and I bragged to my siblings. I got home. I searched for my brother to tell him I just found $300, which of course he didn't believe until I just showed it, put it right in his face. And I remember his jaws dropped. My brother couldn't believe it. But what he did next would completely change my demeanor. This dude asked for $100. All of a sudden, I went from being super excited to extremely offended. And I just started to act like I worked blood, sweat, and tears for this money. I remember looking at him like, do you know what I had to do for these $300, bro? I woke up early on a vacation day, dude. I walked 15 whole minutes, sat through a line of a parade. I had the perfect line of sight to see this money. And before you tell me it's luck, opportunity is when preparation meets luck. So I was prepared, bro. I'll work for this. And you just want an easy cash grab? Absolutely not. So I took my money back, clinched onto it, and I asked my mom to take me to the mall because these $300 had to be put to good use. You know what I'm talking about? I went to Foot Locker. I got some LeBrons with some Elite socks to match. If you know, you know. And then I ended up going to Hollister, getting a red polo and cargo shorts to complete the fit. And with the little that I had left, I ended up getting a shirt for somebody. But honestly, it wasn't even out of generosity. They just kept nagging me for it, and I just I caved in. I wasn't trying to do all that because I let the riches get to me, if I'm being honest. And all of a sudden, this morning that began with me becoming rich, by the end of the day, I was broke. Just left with an outfit I had to wear every 4 days to make the purchase worth it, with a brother who didn't want to talk to me for a week because I didn't give him money, and then a hard conversation with my mom when I told her I needed money for our Canopy Lake trip. It's a little taste of the good life. It costed me everything, right? I had no desire to be generous. I had no desire to be wise, and it was because I had this one problem. And the problem wasn't that I found money. The problem that I had was what I believed about the money that I had. See, somewhere between picking it up off the sidewalk and walking into that mall and splurging it all away, I stopped seeing it as something that I found and started seeing it as something that I've earned. A moment where pure luck made a provision for me, I started to treat like, no, that was my moment. I owned it. And I acted like I was the source of something that I simply stumbled upon. And that belief that I was the source shaped everything. It shaped how I spent it, it shaped how I saved it, and it shaped how I shared it. Which taught me this truth that I want us to dig into today. And it's that stewardship falls apart when our understanding of ownership is misplaced. See, so far in our series, we learned that the reason for Solomon's wealth was to build the temple and systems of justice so that God's glory would be made famous across the earth. We learned that biblical wisdom builds lasting wealth through creating margin and increasing value and managing time and risk. And if you've missed any of those weeks, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. But as we continue into our series, I want us to look a little bit deeper into the life of Solomon, because when you do in 1 Kings, you see something remarkable. And it's that aside from the wisdom and riches that God gave him, he actually worked hard. He strategized well. He went through great lengths to negotiate treaties so that he can grab rare materials that he couldn't possess in the land that he was currently in. All so that he can build one of the greatest building projects in Israel's history, and that's the temple. And when that temple was finally finished, Solomon prayed a prayer of dedication to God in 1 Kings 8. And here's one of the things he said. He said, "You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today." You see, there's no denying that Solomon built with his hands. But he says that when it came to the completion of this temple, the promise of that was fulfilled by God's hands. See, Solomon organized the labor, he secured the materials, oversaw the strategy, did his responsibilities, but what he makes unmistakably clear in his prayer is that while his hands may have constructed it, it was God's hands that ultimately fulfilled it. Solomon did the building, but God did the keeping of the promise. You see, Solomon understood something that most of us forget. As his status increased, as his wealth expanded, one thing he always made a point was that he never saw himself as the source of it all, but just a steward. Meaning that no matter how much he earned, no matter how much he built, no matter how much he obtained, he understood it was never truly his in the first place. And I know we don't want to hear that. And just for those of us in the room that kind of want to get out of that, right? James 1 makes it even more clear by saying whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God, who created all the lights in the heavens. See, the trap that believers can easily fall into when it comes to stewardship is thinking that God is trying to teach us how to steward our resources. But that's not what he's doing. He's actually trying to teach us how to steward his resources. Yes, we work. Yes, we strategize. Yes, we show discipline. Our hands do the building, but it's God's hands that fulfills. Our names may be on those checks, but the provision isn't coming from us. This isn't meant to discredit what we do. It's meant to keep us aligned to why we're able to do it in the first place. It's kind of like, when like a teenager gets their first phone, like we've all been there, maybe they've worked for it or they met every parental requirement under the sun, and now they have a phone. It's their phone. But we know that as long as they're under their parents' roof, what's theirs has rules in place. And whether or not they pay attention to those rules, it can be given or taken away. Because like my mom taught me growing up, you may pay for your phone, but I pay for that roof over your head. Right? And this isn't just some Old Testament principle. This isn't some just old-time wisdom. Jesus actually gave a parable of what this looks like. And it's in this illustration where he confronts us on who we believe the source of what we have is. And here's how the parable goes in Matthew 25. It says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone." Let's pause here. Let's set the scene. He's not just talking about any man. Jesus is talking about himself. And the journey that he's on, this long trip, is his ascension to heaven, getting things ready for us, and we are the servants here on earth that are being put to work. We're being entrusted with things, catch it, that are not ours, they're his. Notice that when he entrusts them, the ownership of what he has never changes. The responsibility does. What's placed in our hands never stops belonging to him. Then in verse 15, it says that he gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it up in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. See, in the parable, what the servants were entrusted with was the man's money. But now notice something. The amounts given out weren't based on like worth, right? It says in proportion to their ability, which means what we're given isn't random. It has nothing to do with our status or how we look. It's entrusted to us with responsibility in mind. The amounts given isn't about value, it's about stewardship capacity. It's about how we're able to be responsible in this moment. And before we feel bad with the bag who got the guy who got 1 bag, the thing to know here is that 1 bag of silver in those times was worth 20 years' wages. So that's a lot, right? So even the servant who received 1 bag of silver was entrusted with something significant. Whether it was 5, 2, or 1, what they were given mattered to the man who left them in charge. And the responsibility wasn't for them to own it and use it how they wish, but to multiply what belonged to the man. And here's how they each carried that out. Verse 16 says, the servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted with 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The first 2 servants went at once and put it to work, everything they were given. And when the master, who's the man as well, Jesus is the master and the man, returned, he celebrated the 2 servants that increased what they were given. But notice what the master says. Well done, good and faithful servant. Not wealthy servant, not impressive servant, not like smart and strategic servant. He says faithful servant. And as a result of that faithfulness, the reward wasn't more money, it was more responsibilities, which tells us that if we are wanting increase, it doesn't start with how much we think we can have, it starts with how much we're actually responsible with now. We learn here that the measure of stewardship isn't increasing opportunity at all, but being obedient with what we've already been entrusted. And here's something we have to understand. When it comes to trust, obedience is a great sign of that. We can say we trust God. We can sing about trusting God. We can pray about trusting God. But obedience is the place where that trust will show up. We want to know how much we trust God. How does it show up in our obedience? See, the first 2 servants trusted the master, and it showed up in how they obeyed. That's what led to their success. Not some fancy strategy, none of that. But then when it came to the 3rd servant, the Bible says that he just dug his bag of silver in the dirt and waited. And when the master approached him, we start to notice a shift in his tone. And here's what happens. That it says that then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant, gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on that. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. You know, if we purely read into the perspective of this 3rd servant, it's easy to feel bad for him, right? It might even be easy to rationalize with him. So it's important we understand what's going on, right? The 3rd servant didn't lose the money. He gave back everything he was given. So what's the problem, right? Here's what's wrong, is that he refused to act. And when he explains why, he reveals the real issue. His reason is because he misunderstood who the master was. He says, I didn't do anything because I knew you to be a harsh man. But we know that's not the case because the master said if that were true, then the real safe bet would have been you putting it into a bank, not just doing nothing. You see, the third servant's inability to multiply wasn't due to a lack of opportunity. It was due to his belief about the owner. What we learn here is that when we misalign who God is, when it comes to the things we possess, we will ultimately mismanage what he's entrusted to us. See, if it were true that the master was harsh, you'd see uniform behavior among all the servants, but you don't. The first two servants actually went straight to work. When the first servant received his portion, he went off at once to put it to work. The second invested. There was an immediate desire to obey. What their actions revealed, like we learned earlier, was that they understood the master differently because they trusted. And we know that the master wasn't harsh with them because he rewarded them well for what they did. See, the first two servants trusted the master, so they moved. The third didn't, so he buried it. And when we fall into this trap of the third servant, when we question who the source is, when we question what we have and who it belongs to, what happens is we run the risk of trusting in our own intuition rather than God's instruction when it comes to stewardship. And as a result, we disobey, which leads to us digging away what we're meant to multiply. And because of the third servant's disobedience, the only bag of silver that was given to him was then taken away and given to a guy shown to be more responsible. But here's the reality. The servant lost the bag the moment he decided to dig away what he was called to steward. Then the master says in verse 29, those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But those who do nothing, even what little they have, will be taken away. This is ultimately Jesus pointing to his return in this parable. The master leaves, he entrusts to the servants, and soon he'll be back to settle his accounts and see how they use what they were given. There's going to be a day where Christ returns, and we're all going to be held accountable to how we lived our lives and how we stewarded what's been given to us. But we need to recognize something. This accountability, it doesn't start once he returns. It's happening right now. Because he isn't just the owner upon his return, he's still the owner while he's away. And if he is the owner, the source of our resources today, then that means that we are held accountable for how we use it now. And verse 29 shows us what that looks like. When we acknowledge God as the source of what we have, when we trust in his instructions, when we walk in obedience, he creates capacity. He increases capacity. But when we claim ownership over what's his, neglect his instruction, and walk in disobedience, we miss out on the opportunity to be a part of this expansive work that he has. Worship team, you can come on up. This is what Solomon understood when he dedicated the temple to God. That he was entrusted. He didn't own. That he was a steward of God's resources, not his own. And this principle would continue to bring increase in Solomon's life. But what we're going to find in the next couple of weeks is that the neglect of this principle would lead to many problems he would later face. But for us here today, what are we holding like owners that God actually entrusted to us as stewards? What are we digging away that God wants us to multiply? Because we will never steward well if we fail to recognize where it's coming from in the first place. You see, stewardship starts with saying, God, what I have isn't mine, and it doesn't come from me, it's yours. What I have isn't to build my empire or to fulfill my desires. It's bigger than just me. What I have is for your kingdom and your purposes. And this is what that looks like practically. It's saying, my money isn't mine. It's a resource for kingdom impact. But it's more than just money. Where I live isn't just my own space to be comfortable. It's a place where godly community can exist. My role or position at my job isn't out of or for my own accolades or gain. It's actually a place of influence I've been entrusted with to be a light. Even with vehicles, one of the things Juan and I always do whenever we get a car is making the declaration that this isn't just our car, it's the kingdom's car. Yeah. And we don't have a lot of cars. I just buy pretty old ones, so I always have to switch them out every now and then. But no matter what, we always say that our cars are for God's purposes, not our conveniences. So when a teenager needs a way to get to youth group or families need a way to get home, as much as I just want to go straight home at times or just go straight to the church at times, I'm reminded this is a kingdom card. When I have to empty my trunk to fit random boxes and packages and snacks every couple of weeks just to put everything back in and restart the process, I have to remember it's a kingdom card. When my teenagers make fun of the squeaky sound my brakes make and I just want to make them walk the rest of the way, right? Like, I have to remember, like, this is a kingdom card. True story, by the way. These kids are mean. You see, adopting this kingdom principle truly changes how you treat the things that have been entrusted to you, because you recognize that it's been given more than for just you. It's for God's purposes for you. And it's not about waiting to have the best in order to give your best. It's about being faithful with what you've already been given, because as we learn, the metric of stewardship is not fruitfulness, it's faithfulness. And see, those who use well what they've been given, even more will they be given. Let's stand. You've been holding on to something tightly like it's yours, whether it be finances or resources, whether it be your influence, time, comfort, whatever it may be. Would you make the decision today to release ownership and instead commit to faithfulness? Not striving for more or waiting for increase, but simply asking God, how can I be obedient with what you've entrusted to me? Because whether we've been given 5, 2, or 1, it matters to God. And he entrusted it to us for a purpose, for multiplication, not for our empire, but for his kingdom. One day he's going to return and settle his accounts with us. But until then, he's still the owner, and we still have a responsibility. So let's be faithful, amen? These altars are open for prayer as we sing.